Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 380, and today's guest is Eduardo Torrealba, CEO and co-founder of Lumafield. As part of my conversation with Eduardo, we talk about the importance of working on hard things. Yes, it's hard to build things that seem impossible at the time, but it is that level of difficulty that attracts the top talent across engineering and other functional areas to join the company. And it is that level of difficulty that once you establish product market fit, it can be highly defensible and really difficult to copy. And it is that level of difficulty that attracts the best investors to fund a company, with the hopes that it can be an industry-defining company, especially when there is hardware involved. Take Lumafield, a pioneering developer of accessible X-ray CT technology. The company recently announced a $75 million Series C round of funding led by IVP, along with new investors G2 Venture Partners and Wellington Management, and previous investors Spark Capital, Lux Capital, Kleiner Perkins, DCVC, and Matter Venture Partners, and angel investors like Tony Fadell. Yes, that Tony Fadell, the inventor of the iPod and founder of Nest. When you have an industry leader like Tony, who after seeing their product and vision and ended up committing to an investment into the company after a 30-minute meeting, you know you are onto something big, as he understood the problem firsthand based on his experience. In the show notes, I have also included a fun video from Lumafield where Tony takes a look at the evolution of the iPod by using Lumafield's platform to explore the different generations of the product. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Eduardo's background story and his initial journey into entrepreneurship with an IoT soil moisture sensor company called Oso Technologies, joining Formlabs and what he worked on in the earlier days of the company and what he learned during the company's growth to $1 billion valuation, the full story of Lumafield in terms of how the team came together and the problem that they are solving, the fundraising process and the current state of the company plus future plans ahead, lessons learned from building companies and raising capital, the importance of a strong company pitch, and so much more. All right, now a brief word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Eduardo. Eduardo, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. Lumafield, there's so much going on with the company. You recently announced a new round of funding. So we're going to talk about all the details about what you're building, the funding, growth plans, all the great stuff with Lumafield. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about something that when I look at the product you're building, the complexity is astronomical. Like there's so much involved with what you've built. So I just thought it was interesting because as an entrepreneur, I would think you would take the stance that what we're building is really hard and it's highly defensible because of that. And that also attracts really high quality talent because people want to work on hard problems. So I guess I just want to set the stage of, hey, it's a good idea to work on hard things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that maybe counterintuitively, the harder the problem you work on, the better people you can attract to that problem. You know, the bigger that problem probably is, the more valuable that problem is, which means there's probably more funding available for that. It really does snowball. I think if you work on, you know, less difficult things that are maybe an integration of a couple of pieces, there's not as much of a moat and there's not as much of a challenge. And, you know, great engineers, they want to sell or they want to work on on hard problems and build great products. And salespeople want to sell stuff that's highly differentiated, and hard things are more differentiated. So, yeah, I think up and down, the harder the better when it comes to building products in many ways.
And obviously there's a lot of challenges that come along with that too. So we'll talk about that as we get into more of the details of Lumafield. But so let's rewind the clock. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah, I grew up in Texas. Grew up just outside of Dallas in Arlington, Texas. I was actually homeschooled from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I was a weirdo, probably still am a weirdo. I was in a small group and I really got to explore my own interests, spent a lot of time reading books out of the library, got really passionate about physics when I was in high school. And yeah, just wanted to become an engineer and apply that knowledge and have a job working on, the physical world. So that led to attending Baylor University in Texas for a mechanical engineering undergrad. But yeah, I've always enjoyed, math, science, technology, engineering, manufacturing. Actually grew up about a 5-minute walk from a semiconductor fabrication facility in Arlington, Texas. It's now an Amazon distribution warehouse, so times are changing. But yeah, I've been closely linked with manufacturing for my whole life, really.
And what did you do after Baylor?
From Baylor, I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to go get a PhD in mechanical engineering. I quickly discovered that I enjoyed building products more than writing papers. And I started a company at the same time that I was starting my PhD and enjoyed that quite a bit more and felt like that was where my career was headed more so than, going through the process of writing a dissertation. I just didn't have the patience for it. I have a lot of respect for the PhDs that I know, the people that work here at Lumafield that have them, but it was just not for me. So yeah, I dropped out of that program after 2 years, had my master's degree, and was running my company for a couple of years before moving to Boston to join Formlabs.
Okay, so you were always like very engineering mindset, but were you also entrepreneurial?
No, not at all. Quite the opposite. My father actually ran a heating and air conditioning repair service company. It was really just a one-man shop for most of my life. And that led to a lot of challenges for our family. The sort of feast or famine. There's a lot of economic turmoil. It's tough to be now they would call it like a solo entrepreneur, but really it was just somebody running a small business. And I think, my mom, she really drilled into all of us kids, like, don't run your own business. Go get a stable job. Like, have stability in your life.
Johnson and
And
Johnson, Procter and
right.
Gamble.
My first internship was with Lockheed Martin, and I was like, I've done it.
Ah,
I've got a stable, like, this is the place. I have lots of thoughts on
winning.
on that whole world. But no, I mean, I think yeah, I was super not inclined that direction at all my entire life. If anything, was kind of oppositely inclined. But yeah, just to dive into it, I mean, I think the way that I got into the world of ultimately venture-backed technology companies was going and doing that internship at Lockheed Martin. Counterintuitively, I worked in Houston, Texas, at Lockheed Martin's facility that was across the street from Johnson Space Center. So this was back in 2008, just to kind of show my age. I was working as an intern on the Orion capsule, so the thing that was part of the Artemis missions. This, like,
That's
it was
cool.
supposed to be the replacement for the space shuttle. Obviously, didn't become that. But it was an entire summer of just being in a single spreadsheet. I had to read hundreds of documents that were, such and such design shall comply with mil spec document, blah, 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 blah. My job was to go read that entire document and look at every single requirement and see if there was anything we might have missed. And the culmination of my summer was a 20 or 30 person meeting with, 10 or 15 engineers from Lockheed Martin or 10 or 15 engineers from NASA talking about the size of a hole that could capture somebody's finger in a strut. And it was like, this can't be it. Like, I can't, my life can't be reading documents and designing holes that, like, are tiny differences that take 30 people to make a decision. And so that was kind of an existential crisis for me because my entire, goal in life was like, get an engineering degree, have a stable job, work at, I wanted to work on like aerospace stuff. So I wanted to do like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or something. And I kind of, I did it. And then I was like, man, this is terrible. So I got back to campus. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had to choose between, sort of disconnected from that. I had to choose between two electives, technical writing or engineering entrepreneurship. I was like, I don't want to take a technical writing class. I just spent my entire summer doing technical writing.
Yeah.
So I took this engineering entrepreneurship class and I found out that there are these people that will just give you money to build things. And those people are called investors. And I didn't know that existed. Um, and so I got really interested in that because, hey, I could build things that I care about that I'm interested in, and I don't have to pay for it myself. Sounds like a pretty good gig. So that led to working with a lot of professors at Baylor who were commercializing research. that was kind of the primary mode of technology entrepreneurship at that university at the time. I think it's evolved since then. I don't stay in terribly close touch with my undergrad alma mater, but yeah. And that led to my interest to get a PhD, become a professor, do research, commercialize that research, start companies that way. So that was really what led to wanting to get a PhD. University of Illinois has a lot of professors that do this commercialization of research. It felt like a good fit for that. So that was really my entry point into the world of being a founder in many ways.
All right, so let's talk about the company you built while you were pursuing your PhD. So, is it Oso Technologies? So it was an IoT
Yeah,
company.
that was what we called it. Awful name.
Yeah.
It was a crew of friends. A couple of them were also Baylor grads that had moved to Illinois for grad school. So some friends from undergrad and grad school. We had been working on, various side projects, and I'd been really interested in this idea of starting a company, since undergrad, learning about it. And when I got to Illinois, I learned, these mythical investors, they will actually write checks to people that are not PhDs. You don't have to be a professor to get an investor. And I was like, whoa, that's very different from what I learned, in undergrad. Um, and so I was like, great, I'll start a company to learn about starting a company. I made the classic mistake of starting a company to start a company. And so, that was what we did. We were 4 or 5 grad students. We had a side project. We decided we'd start a company. We brought in some angel funding. We did a Kickstarter. It was kind of the classic small scale hardware Kickstarter, story of 2010, right? There were a lot of people that were living this life at that period of time. So
Was
we were
this
part of
when
that group.
Pebble, when Pebble was a huge
I
Kickstarter
think it
hit then, or
was around then. I don't know if it was right before or right after, but it was that moment. It was like Pebble, the Form 1 was around that time. There were a lot of people doing it a lot better than we did it, but there were a lot of people doing, like, I don't know, smart devices, right? Like the Internet of Things was becoming a phrase that people were using at that time. I remember there was a huge report that General Electric, to further date myself, put out about like the future of the industrial IoT. And I was like, this is the thing. So yeah, we built this product that was a soil moisture sensor with a radio that would connect back to a base station that you plug into your router, and then it uploaded data about the amount of water in your soil. And we made a lot of, actually, my joke is always that we like sort of theoretically built a product, but mostly we just made mistakes in that company. So we uploaded this data to the cloud, and then we would kind of plot the water content of the soil over time. And if you told us what plant you had it in, we would tell you how much water it needed, and we could give you alerts if you were over or under watering. It's a real problem. It's a challenge, but the economics didn't make sense, and we didn't have a go-to-market strategy, and there were a long list of errors. But it was kind of the, like, you know, actually doing it, sort of getting an MBA by running a business. That company ended up selling for around the amount of money that was put into it. I think it basically like paid off the debts, sort of situation. It was bought by Scotts Miracle-Gro a few years later. But it was a great learning experience. I didn't make any money out of it, but I learned a ton. And I think that everybody that went into it with their eyes open. Nobody kind of lost their life savings or anything off of that company failing. And um, it was a really great kind of transition into the reality of manufacturing. That I think is the most pivotal experience that I've had.
the manufacturing piece? What did you learn?
Yeah, so that was my first, real encounter with manufacturing more than about 10 of something. So, we had built prototypes, and we had, given systems to friends to test out, but we did a Kickstarter, and then we had to make, thousands of these little moisture sensors. And so we visited contract manufacturers and PCBA fabs and injection molding houses, all throughout the Midwest that did this kind of work. And it was a really eye-opening experience. I mean, the amount of money and time that it would take to build a couple thousand of something was really mind-blowing. It was like obvious that the world hadn't been built for that kind of scale. It was made for maybe quantity 1 million or quantity like 10 of something. And so when you're in this, kind of valley of death position of, quantity and cost performance, there really wasn't a good fit for that. And at the time, I like vividly remember looking at the cost of the kind of 3D printer that could produce the parts that we needed to build 1,000 of these. And that 3D printer was, a few $100,000. And getting the mold cut and paying the CM to do, 1,000 of those parts was like maybe $100,000. So it was like, man, I can't really justify buying like highly versatile equipment that could do this, but I can like just afford with the money I've raised to like cut the check to get these parts made. But then that's it. That's all I've got, right? Like I can make that exact thing, or if it doesn't work, there's no flex. It was really like, man, the flexibility just isn't here. And contrasting that experience was the work that I was doing, I was still in graduate school in a semiconductor fabrication lab where I was building MEMS devices. And you would just go in and, tune a bunch of knobs and you could make all different kinds of items with like high precision, really high quality. It was very scalable. It was just a totally different way of approaching design, manufacturing, and quality assurance than what I was seeing in these, these non-semiconductor, like traditional manufacturing houses throughout the United States. There was the whole China thing as well at the time, but we were at the scale or they had the money to like go do something like that. So I never really experienced that piece of like go to Shenzhen and talk to all the parts vendors and get a mold cut. So it was really just domestic manufacturing for OSO Technologies and PlantLink. So, that whole experience really drove home this point that like manufacturing, traditional manufacturing is really stuck. Like it hasn't had the breakthrough moments that I think I expected it to have, going into that. And that's a pretty common experience. A lot of people who build physical product have this where they're just like, oh my gosh, everything's handmade, right? Like there are tools, but like really everything's hand assembled. And so, yeah, that was really the motivating factor to when that company, wound down and we sold it, to move out here to Boston and join Formlabs and work on this problem. That's kind of the next, how do you go one layer up the stack, right? And start making the tools that make the things that could, revolutionize manufacturing.
So that was the genesis of the idea for Lumafield, was that experience.
That's right. Yeah, the
Wow.
genesis
Okay.
for me was that moment of semiconductor manufacturing is like this, traditional manufacturing is like this. There's a big gap. In 2014, 2013, 2014, I don't I don't think you could fault anybody for thinking that, 3D printing was going to be the solution to that problem. It really felt like that was, 2012 certainly even more, but even just right after it was like, man, this is going to be revolutionary technology that changes manufacturing. And so, yeah, it felt like it was the right industry to be in, and Formlabs felt like the right company to join. I mean, then and even still now, I think, the standout company in the 3D printing space, at least the startup space. I think there's kind of the traditional old guard, but Formlabs, I think at the time and again today, really revolutionary company, was a great place to land and kind of explore that whole industry and what the future of manufacturing could look like.
And how did you end up at Formlabs? How did that all come together? And what did you work on?
Yeah, I ended up at Formlabs because I guess the long story short is I knew people that knew the CEO. And so whenever I was leaving my last company, I sent an email out. I guess this is like it's a playbook, advice, whatever you want to call it. I found that the successful way to find a new job is to email a small group of people a very specific sort of set of criteria that you're looking for. Instead of saying, I'm looking for a job, does anybody know anybody? And just like blast it out to my entire network, or, go on LinkedIn and say like open to work. I emailed a few people and I said, I'm looking for a job that meets, I think it was 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4. It was like some percentage of some criteria. Do you know any companies that fit this? And it was like, there was some geography stuff, there was some industry stuff. I wasn't like, I want to go get a job at Formlabs. I was like, I want something that satisfies these things. And 3 or 4 of those people said, you should talk to Max Lebowski at Formlabs. I was like, great, I'll talk to Max. So all of those people pinged Max and he was like, hey, I think I need to talk to Eduardo. We got on a video call. I think it was a Skype back in the day, and chatted. And then I flew out to Boston and interviewed and, fell in love with the vision for the Fuse One and joined and started building that product.
So you joined when did they have product in market? Was it still Fuse
Yeah,
One
yeah.
was
Formlabs had shipped the Form 1 Plus. They had started development on the Form 2, but that product hadn't started shipping when I joined. So it was really Form 1 Plus, had worked out the kinks from the Form 1 or many of the major ones, and the company was really starting to, see some growth. And then Form 2 obviously took it to a totally different level. But yeah, I just worked on the Fuse 1. I never worked on the SLA products. I was there from guess I'd say like the first prototype I helped build with one of my co-founders here at Lumafield now. And then through sort of product launch, and then there was a lot of time that was spent after that at Formlabs getting that product into the market. So I'd say I have fingerprints on the Fuse one, but I certainly credit all of its success to the great engineers and the team at Formlabs that did that after I left. So I can't take a whole lot of credit for the Fuse one.
But you saw a massive growth in the company from, I think I saw maybe on
Yeah.
LinkedIn or something, from like 75 people to 500 people.
Yeah, totally right. Formlabs grew a lot. Again, no credit or fault of my own during that time period, but I think the experience of watching a company that I think had really achieved product market fit, go to $1 billion valuation by the time I left. Yeah, it made a mark. It certainly makes you think. It changes your definition of success and raises the bar for your expectations of what it means to go be, building a company. And I'll be forever grateful for that experience. Like getting to see what it actually looks like to build a company, I think changes your perspectives on a lot of the things that maybe people talk about on the internet, or there's just by definition there's more early stage founders than later stage founders. Most companies are going to fail, and I think a lot of the things you worry about at the very beginning, they're important, but you can get all that right and still fail if you're not able to really scale the business. And Formlabs certainly was really growing aggressively in the time that I was there, and getting to have a kind of first person view of that was extremely valuable.
But what I think is really cool about your experience that probably wasn't intentional was you built these building blocks of learnings from starting a company to start a company, not really have a actual problem product, but built one and learned a ton, and ended up getting acquired, and investors kind of netted out what they put in. Then you go to Formlabs and see this massive growth and adoption and
Yeah.
organizational, operational, all these different things that they had to scale up. Like, so that you're like earning your startup MBA, whatever, master's in
Right.
startup land
Yeah.
over this time to be successful to then launch Lumafield. So I guess that's a good segue. So at what point did you really start to focus on Lumafield and then obviously go full time on it?
Yeah, so I left Formlabs in the summer of 2018. Again, kind of a long story short, I think, the things I wanted out of my career weren't going to be available at Formlabs. And ultimately that was like founding a company. You're either the founder of the company or you're not. So like, no discredit to Formlabs on that again. But yeah, I felt like I wanted to go out and be part of something early, and, kind of I wanted to find out if I was good enough to build a company like Formlabs, I guess is one way to say it. I was at a event that one of the venture capital funds that invest in Lumafield holds for their CEOs every couple of years, and they had a professional athlete, sort of a typical sort of speaker at these things. And somebody asked, that quarterback, like NFL quarterback, like, what was the difference between you and all the other people that were in your draft class, that might have gotten drafted ahead or behind of you? And there were a lot of people that were like, outstanding quarterbacks in every NFL draft class. And they said, the difference between me and those people was that I was willing to find out if I was not good enough. Like I was willing to put it all on the field and fail. And they had several years where they were not, considered a top quarterback. And a lot of people quit during those time periods when they're like, man, this isn't the like fast success. And so he said, a lot of people don't actually want to find out if they're good. They're unwilling to stare into failure and fail and find out that they're not good enough at that job. They want to have an excuse for why. Oh, well, if I had been in that, blah, 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 right? Like, and that really resonated with me. I think it would have been easy to stay at Formlabs and criticize the leadership at Formlabs, or be on Twitter and talk shit about other startup companies and say like that company doesn't have what it takes to whatever it might be, right? But I really found that I didn't care about that stuff. I wanted to find out if I was actually going to be able to build a company like that. We have a long way to go at Lumafield. I haven't achieved anything close to that yet, but I think we're on the right path, and I think it's exciting to be the person trying to build the thing, and be willing to say like, this is it. This is my life's work. It's either going to work or it's not going to work. And that's there's a lot of stress and pressure on that, but I think it's also very invigorating.
And how did it come together with you and your co-founders? Because it's not like, one of your colleagues is from Formlabs, but not everyone else. So I was just curious
Yeah,
how
that's
the
right.
dynamics of the team came together.
Yeah, there were people that I met while I was at Formlabs. Andreas Bastian was at Autodesk, but he was in the 3D printing world. So we would see each other at events, and we'd meet up when we were in each other's cities. Um, Rick Fulop is a co-founder. He's on our board. He was the founder and CEO of Desktop Metal, another Boston-based 3D printing company. So there was sort of a
Onshape.
small community.
Like,
Yeah, totally. He was an early
like so
investor
when I
in
saw
Onshape.
Rick I was like, I didn't know Rick was involved in this company too. Like he's amazing.
Yeah, Rick is great. I really, really enjoy working with Rick. But yeah, there's kind of a plethora of people that are just sort of in the community that I was a part of. And I think being able to do something like, building and launching the Fuse One really establishes a lot of credibility that you're the kind of person that can, push something forward. And so, that opened up a lot of doors to get to know great people like Andreas and Rick and Kevin and Scott and Jonathan and others. Those first kind of 10 people at Lumafield, I think, are the core of the business. And many of them have ended up in executive positions here. And I think that, that group of people is the reason that this company is successful, for sure.
Now, when you went to raise, if my research is correct, so correct me if I'm wrong, when you went to raise capital, like your seed capital, you didn't actually have a product, right? It's like you didn't have a prototype, but you had a vision. And what was that investor presentation deck like?
It's very short. Um, yeah, Rick. Yeah, I mean, all credit to Rick on the seed round. He knew everybody in the venture community. Desktop Metal was a hot company at that moment in time, and that opened up a lot of doors. So when Rick said that, like, "Hey, I'm going to work with Eduardo. We're starting a company," that opened a lot of doors, and there was a lot of interest in that round. So we had kind of an overview of what we were envisioning, but there were a lot of question marks on that. I won't even call it a business plan. It was a pretty short pitch deck. We said, hey, we're going to build a tool that's going to be really relevant for 3D printing, which is an industry that's taking off. Ended up not being true in a lot of ways, but we found something else that was a much better target for our technology, and so that resonated with these early investors that were able to, I think, see beyond the scope of that vision, maybe, but also take a bet on myself and on Rick and on the things we had built and the places we had been before that. So I wouldn't say that it's like a terribly repeatable playbook for everybody, but it worked out for us. Yeah.
And we need to educate the audience on who the seed round was because it's noteworthy. It's Kleiner Perkins, Lux Capital, and Tony Fadell. So how did you get Tony Fadell involved in the company? Like that, I mean, the Kleiner Perkins is, obviously as blue chip as you get. Lux Capital is amazing. Tony, on the other hand, I'm like, how did you get him involved?
Yeah, I mean, Rick knew Tony Fadell. Rick sent an introduction email and said, "Hey, Tony, you should take a look at this company that we're putting together." And I had a call with Tony and talked to him through the pitch. And I think it was a 30-minute phone call. And he said, "I'm in. I want to invest in this company. I think it could be something really special." Tony had the experience. I think a lot of the people who were early investors in Lumafield, the earliest investors, maybe even through Series B, there were people who had real experience building physical product, and they knew that this was technology they wish they could have had during that experience. Tony, there's a great video that we have, maybe we can put it in the show notes, of Tony with our head of marketing, John, looking at CT scans of the earliest iPods and talking about all the challenges with designing and integrating that technology, and wishing that they had had the ability to see inside of that product while they were building it. So I think that, it was kind of in many ways, it was obvious to someone like Tony that, like, this could revolutionize. If we can pull it off, it could be really revolutionary. And we're still in the process of pulling it off. But Tony has been an amazing backer of the company. He's participated in every round. He's a huge advocate for us, and he's a great resource for me as a CEO. So I'll be forever grateful for Tony for his involvement in the company.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, so let's talk about Lumafield, and you've given hints of what you're solving. So let's dig deeper into that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to describe Lumafield, but usually when I introduce myself, I tell people I work on industrial inspection equipment. Because that's what we do. We build hardware and software that helps manufacturers understand the things they're making. There's so much more to it than that. There's cloud services and artificial intelligence and computational geometry and physics and material science, and it's a crazy problem and a crazy product in many ways. But at the end of the day, the thing that we solve for our customers is their ability to have confidence in the things they're building, the designs that they've made, and the partners that they're working with to manufacture critical items. Our customers make the batteries that go into electric vehicles. They make medical devices that get implanted in your body. They make, crucial parts that go onto, high performance athletic equipment like bicycles. They make cars. They make defense products that keep our warfighters safe, on the battlefield, and that stuff has to work. You don't want your bicycle to work some of the time and sometimes to collapse because there was a crack and a defect in the manufacturing process. You don't want your defense system to work 75% of the time, right? This stuff has to work 100% of the time. 99% isn't good enough in some of these industries. And so we give them tools that let them supercharge their manufacturing teams by seeing inside of things. Again, to boil it all down, we make an industrial CT scanner. We make a system that gives these amazing 3D X-ray views of products. Certainly encourage your audience to go to lumafield.com and sort of play with Voyager, look at our software, look at the things that it does. It's amazing. It gives people this view inside of what they make, both in the development process and in the manufacturing process.
Like when you see the videos of your product in action, it's like, this is where my mind gets blown of how smart people are. I'm like, how do you even start to conceptualize to build this? Like, there's a company in the Boston area called 10 Beauty that I just am fascinated by. Do you know 10 Beauty at all?
I don't know. I don't know
Okay,
about them.
so
Tell me more.
so it's robotics, consumer robotics, and it's not the problem that it's solving. It's how did you actually build it that fascinates me. So it's robotic manicure machine.
Well, yeah, I've seen stuff like this before. That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone has different fingernails, and it does each
Yeah.
step of the manicure process. It removes, it cleans, it cuts, it paints, and their business model is the paint, the cartridge,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
printing. So
Right.
great company, and they're selling B2B to C. So
Yeah.
they're
Yeah. Right.
so they're not selling direct to consumer, which is smart. Anyways, I look at your product in action in the videos, and I'm just like, how do you even start to build this with all these components and everything spinning around, doing the analysis and the 3D imaging? I'm just like, software, hardware, like, and then you got to manufacture this. So how do you get started?
You find the smartest people you've worked with and you tell them that you're going to build something crazy and you ask them if they want to join in and tell them you've got a bunch of money to do it. So, yeah, it was kind of this self sustaining reaction of smart people working on a hard problem, making a little bit of progress and being able to show that to each other. I think there were a bunch of milestones. We bought a lead cabinet off of eBay with an X-ray source and a detector in it from the 90s. It kind of barely worked. And we just kind of replaced it piece by piece to build that first prototype. We wrote all of our own software, proved to ourselves that we could do this, and then we repeated that process over and over again. So it's very iterative. I think in many ways you want to start with a working version of if there's industrial CT scanning has existed for a long time. We didn't invent that technology. It's been around since the history of CT scanning. Since they've been looking inside people's brains, they've been trying to look inside parts. It's a small industry, but it's very well established. So we're able to look at what's been done in this space already, and then how would we do it if we were approaching it from scratch? With kind of a first principles, laws of physics, economic realities, technology that's been developed today. What are the things we can bring to that? Sort of a different approach to try to get this in the hands of every engineer in the world. And so that's what we did. We kind of attacked this from two directions. What already exists in the industry? How does it work? What's the best performance you can get? How much does that cost you? What could we do if we were designing it from scratch? And what's the point where those two things sort of cross over, right? We need good enough quality performance to be able to convince people who have never used this technology before that they should adopt it. But we don't need so much performance that we're trying to convince people that have spent millions of dollars on CT scanning infrastructure to throw it all away and move to Lumafield. That's not our business model. We're going after the 95% of our customers today at Lumafield have never owned a CT scanner before. They're getting into this technology for the first time. That's what we want to do. We want to make it a new tool for engineers, across the board.
And how did you get those early adopters?
A lot of phone calls and emails. We reached out to people that we had met along the journey in our careers, and we said, "Hey, you bought a Formlabs printer at some point, and we met at a user conference or a trade show or whatever, and I got your business card, and I'm doing something new. You want to like take it for a spin? You want to try it out? Or you're somebody that Andreas worked with at Autodesk, or whatever, right? Like, we felt good about being able to do something like that because we started a company that was totally different than what we had worked on before. We weren't saying buy our product instead of an Autodesk product or a Formlabs product, right? This is like a totally different thing. And so, yeah, we were able to go through, the connections that we had, our LinkedIn profiles, and be like, we met, 2 years ago. You want to like take a look at this thing? And when you have enough people and enough shots on goal, you're able to find a few people that'll take that jump. So the company was in stealth mode for a couple years, and we just built our user base off of these kind of first degree connections, and then got referrals and met more people. And yeah, it was a lot of people said no before they said yes to Lumafield, both customers, employees, and investors.
And obviously that feedback went into making the product better overall and continuing
Yeah,
to
that's
get
right.
momentum with sales. And because
Right.
I would think the sale is, it's got to be a complex sale. It's not just like, hey, you're buying some, cloud service that's a SaaS company, right? Like this is a physical product that they need to have installed in their space. And
That's right. Yeah,
so,
it's both, right? We have a cloud product, so we have recurring revenue, and we have a piece of physical infrastructure that we install as part of that contract. So all of our customers pay us annual recurring revenue. They pay a subscription fee, that gets them access to the hardware. We install it in your facilities, and you operate it. And then we also have our cloud for the analysis, data storage, data sharing, working with everything, gaining those insights from the data. And then we have our services team that helps support you with application engineering and everything else that you need to be successful. So it's really this full, you batteries included in sort of like a programming language sense. Like, everything you need to be successful is included with your annual subscription to Lumafield. There's not buy our hardware for $250,000 and then you have your working solution. We just we install something that works for you on day one.
and I highlighted this at the outset. So you recently announced your Series C round of funding. You did do a Series B in 2022, led by Spark Capital. But let's talk about those milestones of raising your B round, now your C round.
Yeah, we raised the seed that we talked about. Then we did Series A in the fall of 2020 with DCVC. James Hardiman was the partner that led that round. That round was led, in the middle, kind of the darkest days of the pandemic. We were raising money over Zoom, wearing masks in a lab, showing a machine on, a laptop, giving them access to data. It was a big leap for DCVC to make that swing. But they believed in us, and I think it's working out so far. And then in 2022, we had just launched the company. We were in a position where it would be a good time for us to raise money from a company milestone perspective, but it was a bad time. The Nasdaq crashed pretty hard in 22, and we went out to start raising money like as it was doing that. And so, yeah, we were very fortunate to connect with Santo Politi at Spark Capital. He had previously, similar to Tony Fadell, he had been a leader at a company that made physical products. He had been a big part of Panasonic, and had built like real physical product, and like led a team of engineers manufacturing things in Japan. And that was it's not a common background for a venture capitalist to have, but he fell in love with the product, and he knew that we were onto something very special there. And so, yeah, he led that Series B, and that really, ushered in the next, couple years of growth for Lumafield. We were able to be really disciplined with that capital and make sure that we made a lot of progress on building up recurring revenue, proving out the business model, proving out the product market fit. And that was what really led to, our latest Series C. That was a very competitive round. It was preempted. IVP gained a lot of conviction around the business, quickly and without us even having, all of our materials together. And I think, especially in the current funding environment, that's pretty unusual, especially if you're not, starting a foundational AI model company, where there's just like, a massive amount of capital being allocated. Yeah, it was great to see that kind of conviction, and several other investors, got excited as well, which let us build out a really great syndicate for that round. But yeah, I would say, you know, I always joke with founders that when you're raising a round, there's some balance between 100% story or 100% vibes and sort of 100% data and numbers and like performance. I think we still got a lot of vibes credit, but we're starting to get some credit for our numbers as well. And that really helped us, put this round together very quickly.
Okay, now post Series C, it's go time, right? Go to market, right? So like,
Totally.
what's the plan looking ahead?
Yeah, we're stepping on the gas. So, we had about the same headcount for 2 years at Lumafield, 80 to 90 people. And during that time period, we grew our annual recurring revenue by 9x. So really, really increased revenue in 2 years, tripled it twice. And then so we have a really good idea of what it takes to be a successful account executive. How much does it cost to generate a lead? How effective are we at converting those leads into customers? We have a really good model for this now. That's tested with millions of dollars of recurring revenue behind that data. So now the question is, how fast can we scale that thing? So we raised that money. We brought in phenomenal sales leader. Bill Cronin was the chief revenue officer at Xometry. Grew that company from a couple $1 million to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And we're going to do it again here at Lumafield. We're going to run it back and build a big company. So yeah, we're going to double our headcount at Lumafield. Most of that is in the form of salespeople, marketing people, customer success people. Really, that go-to-market function is moving fast here at Lumafield.
Is the hiring, like, I know you're kind of bi-coastal. Is it mainly in Boston, San Francisco, or?
No, yeah, we are bi-coastal. We have offices on both in San Francisco and in Cambridge. The account executive salespeople hiring is really nationwide. I tell my team all the time, manufacturing is a face-to-face business. The hybrid working world of, post-COVID has, changed a lot of things for people, but you still have to go into the factory to make things. So our customers are in those facilities, and they're there. They're happy to talk to you in person. We need to go visit them. So we hire people, around the country, to be able to go see customers in Florida or Washington, places that are maybe not like a short drive away from one of our offices. I was just at a customer facility in Providence, Rhode Island, just outside of Providence yesterday. So yeah, we go and drive to people when we can, but we also get on airplanes and fly. And sometimes it's nice to have somebody close by so they can go visit a prospective or current customer quickly.
All right, so we talked about the foundational years of learning from starting your first company, Formlabs. Now, looking back at Lumafield, what have been the biggest takeaway learnings so far?
That's a tough question to answer. There are a lot of answers that come to mind that feel pretty cliche. I think certainly the things that you hear from a lot of CEOs and founders, like it's harder than you think it's going to be. There's not a straight path. There's all that kind of stuff. It's not really worth repeating. I feel like the piece that stands out to me the most is that we have built a place where I would say the culture at Lumafield is uncomfortable, because we're growing. This isn't a place where you can come in and sit back and 100,000 leads are going to come in and you're going to just help somebody fill out a form to buy something, or where we're going to make a PowerPoint presentation and ship that off to China and they're going to make the product for us. Like, you have to work for a living at Lumafield, and that's everybody, right? This is a tough place to work because we're doing something really hard, like we highlighted before, and we have really high expectations. The experience of seeing Formlabs grow and the experience of seeing, some of the other places that our employees have worked achieve greatness, and looking at what is possible in this industry. I haven't gone off on my tangent about how amazing Kian says as a company, but there's $100 billion company in our space. There's multiple $100 billion companies that work on the infrastructure of manufacturing. That's the prize. Like, that's what we can go build. We can build a generational technology company that redefines what it means to be a mechanical engineer and to manufacture things. that is not easy, and you have to work really hard, and you have to grow, and growth is really uncomfortable. And I think that that constant raising of the bar and saying like, let's go faster, let's go harder, let's achieve greatness. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. And I think you have to find people who are willing to be uncomfortable. You can't have people who say like, I don't really want to travel for my sales job, or I'm not really willing to, rewrite that piece of code. That's not going to work at a company like this. No matter what you want to do on work-life balance or culture, any of those things, you need people that are willing to just be uncomfortable for extended periods of time. And I feel like that, again, maybe that's very obvious, but I think leaning into that is really important for companies, especially in the industry that the Lumafield's in.
What about the capital raise part? Like, you talked about your seed round. There was some
Yeah,
relationships there that helped out with that, but
sure.
you said you got a lot of no's, for future rounds. So like what advice would you have on raising capital for a hardware or software company?
I think the specifics of every situation are really important. What that founder has done in the past, the relationships they have, any investor relationships they have. What area are they building in? You want to be selective about the people you go talk to, but you also have to confront the reality that like you're probably not going to call 5 investors and get 4 yeses and get 3 term sheets. It's probably going to look different than that. And I know, I'm trying not to do a lot of name dropping, but I know people that run multi-billion-dollar companies that get no's for, multiple rounds in a row. And then finally someone says like, oh, actually, I do get what you're building now. I want to put a check into that. And they become, massive breakout success companies by the time, that person says yes. So yeah, there is no general advice, I think. And I think that that's maybe the hardest part about starting a company and running a venture-backed company is that there's some core principles you should know about, incorporating your company, and you have to kind of know the basics, right? But like winning a Formula One race, there's not 3 things that you can do that will make sure that you win. There's a bunch of other pieces of that that are incredibly specific that you need to execute on, relentlessly every single time to be able to successfully raise capital. So again, Eduardo at Lumafield.com, always happy to talk specifics with someone, especially off the record. But general advice, do or do not. There's no try, right? Like you got to get it
Well,
done.
yeah,
That's the job.
persistence and targeting the
Yeah,
right investors that are doing whatever round you're seeking. Make sure that they're not
totally.
doing something that's way off the cuff of what you're searching to build. But how about the pitch? Like you think about your pitch from the outset, right? Like we had a very minimal deck, but how did you get that conviction that we're the team that's uniquely qualified to solve this problem and you'll want to, bet on us?
The very initial seed stage, it was one of those moments where I think in every meeting I went into, I kind of viewed it as like there are only 2 outcomes. They're either going to say yes or they're going to say no. And at that point, it felt like either of those was acceptable. Just don't waste my time, right? Like there is a lot of money in the world that will invest in startups. It doesn't matter what's going on in the economy or the stage of your company or anything. There's more money than there are good companies. And so you have to prove that you're a good company. And I think, I was either ready for those meetings and those interviews and those conversations with those investors, or I wasn't. And it was not a situation where I was off by 2%, right? I would talk to someone and they'd be like, yes, I'm really excited about this. I want to do it. Or they'd be like, I don't really get it. I'm not sure. And I'd be like, great, not a fit. Moving on. And so I think this, there is a lot of focus in any area where there's like intense competition. I think this applies to getting into top schools or getting jobs at elite firms. At some level, you just have to accept that you're like either ready for that and you've done what it takes to prepare, or you're not. And then there's some amount of luck that's involved with this of like, am I catching that person on the right day? Did they just talk to some other founder in this space that has a better pitch than me? Like, you can't always control those things. But what you can control is, the relentless pursuit, of success and of completing the task. And I think that if you are not deterred and you have that conviction and you have that, that just desire to succeed or die, for your company, and you kind of confront the reality that like, I'm either going to go raise this money or I'm going to go find a different job. I think that I'd like to fire under you.
Yeah. All right. 3 apps you can't live without. Can't be Slack, email, or your calendar.
Man, it's Spotify. I think music is a big one. I have a 4-year-old daughter, so there's a lot of requests for music, so that's a big part of it. But I also, I love listening to music while I work. I think it really helps you focus. Could be anything. I listen to a lot of pretty trashy sort of top 40 stuff, but I also love, maybe it's the same thing, but whenever I travel and I'm in another country, I like to find the top 50 in that country on Spotify and just
Well,
like
that's
listen to
cool.
that while I'm walking around. Because I think it's very easy to like listen to the music you're used to when you're in new places, and then you just kind of feel like you're going through this, everything is Brooklyn kind of view of the world, of like everything's always the same. But you kind of immerse yourself in other cultures when you travel. I think that's like really, really cool. My home screen is at the bottom of my thing is my browser, Spotify, messaging, and Superhuman. I know you said it can't be email, but Superhuman is
I guess we could let
phenomenal.
superhuman slide.
All right. Superhuman is where I spend the majority of my life. I mean, it's like, on my desktop, on my phone. Email is the primary way that I communicate with people, and text messages. The other one that's on here that I've been, using a lot lately as I've done more international travel is an app called Time Shifter. I don't know if that's one that you've heard in these interviews, but it's a great app. You put in the flights that you're taking and you put in your normal kind of sleeping routine, and then it gives you like very specific actionable things to do on a time basis to help yourself fight jet lag. So if you're flying to Asia or Europe, it's like, hey, you need to go to bed at this time. You need to avoid bright lights. You need to stop wearing sunglasses and get light. You need to drink coffee, stop drinking coffee, take melatonin if you take melatonin. And so, yeah, every time I follow the advice of that app, I basically get through, no matter what the scale or the speed of the travel is with no jet lag. And that's pretty great. I'm getting a little older, and it's tough to just, instantly bounce back from being in 5 time zones away or 12 time zones away. So certainly shout out Time Shifter as a good thing if you're doing a lot of travel for work. And again, manufacturing is a face-to-face business, and it happens all over the planet. So I'll probably be doing more, not less of that in the future.
Love that. That's definitely one we haven't heard yet. So, what about any podcast or book recommendations for entrepreneurs?
Okay. I really like the Acquired podcast. I'm sure people talk about that a lot.
Fantastic. Yep.
That is my like, I have to do a bunch of work around the house. I'm going to listen to something for 4 hours. It's a great one on Indian Premier League cricket, which is like not
Yeah.
something I
Yeah.
spend any time
Yep.
thinking about, but it's great to
Right.
kind of get that like really deep dive into things. So I certainly would recommend that if you like to like listen to extensively well researched, conversations about businesses and the whole history of a business. Um, that's a good one. Books. I I really like reading older books. I think that, kind of contemporary business books are usually subject to a ton of biases that are super weird. Like I'll give kind of a anti-recommendation. There's a book that is like super cited in the startup community by Andy Grove called Only the Paranoid Survive. And there are like a third of that book is great. And then if I'm remembering correctly, I think 2/3 of that book is like Andy Grove's thoughts on the internet from like the mid 90s or something. And it's not terrible, but like I don't really care what somebody thought in the process industry about the internet 30 years ago. Like I can see if they were right or not, but is that useful for me?
Yeah.
Not really. I think in many ways being able to go back and look at, I actually have a collection of books on my shelf here. One of them is I have these giant tomes. This is a history of engineering and science in the Bell system. So Bell Telephone Company,
So
the
cool.
early years, 1875 to 1925. What was it actually like to build the Bell telephone system from scratch? I have another very similar book that I'm now forgetting the name of that's about Dow Chemical from the late 1800s to the mid 1950s. And, and then there's another one about DuPont that's great. So these are books that were published 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. They might be out of print, but they're like a real account of doing the thing, right? It's not about projecting into the future of what's going to happen. It is a firsthand account of what it was actually like to build something, to build an industrial company. There's a book called Liftoff about the early history of SpaceX from inception to the first successful launch of the Falcon 1. Again, a little bit of Elon Musk, nothing wrong with that, but mostly about the people designing the engines, welding the rocket flames, flying out to the island and like getting the thing off the ground, and the specific ways that those launches failed. I think that, it's always easy to look back, right, and talk about why something was a great idea, or to project into the future and make these sort of prognostications. But talking to the people that did it about what it was like to actually do it in the moment, I think there's something valuable there. I would really encourage people to seek out those kinds of books more so than thought leadership. Not
I
that
love
useful.
that. So I'm such a junkie on that type of stuff, like the real stories behind what
Yeah.
happened, like whether it's an autobiography or a company, like I feed off of that stuff. So great
Yeah. Yeah.
recommendations.
And it's tricky too. I mean, I would say the downside, and probably going too long about this topic, but I think oftentimes if you read an autobiography of a successful person, there are too many incentives to kind of whitewash things. It's easy to look back, right? This is what I'm saying. It's easy to look back and say, I was successful because of this, right? Or I made this decision, but not to talk about the warts. I think when you go a layer below and you hear from people who didn't become famous or didn't become rich necessarily off of those things, you really find a much more unvarnished version of reality. And in many ways, this is why I really encourage CEOs to build relationships with people that are, within kind of one, this is very limited advice, but like one round of the round that you're in. So if you're a Series A founder, talk to people that are raising Series Seed and talk to people that have raised Series B, because you can tell the people that are just behind you what it is really like right now to do these things, and the people who are just ahead of you can talk to you about it. I joke a lot that like billionaires give bad advice because they're post-economic. They have no, like, their life is like not connected to reality at this point. I know a founder who asked a billionaire investor of theirs for advice on something around a personnel issue with their company, and they said, "We'll just fire everybody and start over." And it was like, that's not an option. I can't
I
do that.
can't
You
do
can do
that.
that. I can't do that, right? So you want this
Uh,
advice and this view on history, on the real doing of the thing in the moment. You don't want the view of someone who was wildly successful looking back and telling you, why they were perfect. Anyway, I'm going into
I
too
love
much
that.
detail on this topic.
That's fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
Eduardo, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story, your journey, all the great work you and your team at Lumafield are up to, and obviously all the great advice.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And to all your listeners, just, keep building.